Hello everyone, Ethan here, and welcome to the second lecture in our introduction series. Now today I thought I would talk about another question that is very fundamental to our exploration of the model. And that question is, simple as that, what is socionics? And in this lecture, that will be split into two parts, I'll attempt to answer that question. In the first part, I'll be highlighting the differences between a trait theory and a type theory to provide some sort of psychological context to the background of socionics. And then in part two, I'll be going over exactly what socionics is and some key terms that you'll need to know for the future lectures in my video series. For this first part, I thought I would explain in detail what a trait theory of personality is and what a type theory of personality is. Now, that's not to say that any theory of personality can be boxed into one of these two categories. There are all sorts of different models in psychology. There are all sorts of different perspectives in psychology. There are psychoanalytic theories of personality, social cognitive theories of personality. But the reason that I'm highlighting the differences between these two specifically is because they share some overlap and some split in very distinct areas that I think is important for our understanding of how socionics fits into psychology as a whole. So let's start on our exploration. What is a trait theory? A trait theory is concerned with the measurement of traits, and by traits we mean patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. For example, if you've ever heard of, and I'll be going that over, the Big Five model that has traits. For example, extroversion, and you notice in someone who is extroverted that they have a certain set of qualities to them, that they're loud, maybe they're boisterous, maybe they like to socialize quite a bit, and so that is what a trait is a pattern of thought, emotion, and behavior. And to add on to that, a trait is something stable, different, consistent, and influential. Now, what do I mean by each of those four categories? Let's bring up the quality of extroversion. If somebody has high extroversion, we should see that that trait is stable over time. When they hit 50 years old, it's not like they're suddenly going to become extremely reserved and introverted. No, the trait is supposed to be stable over the individual's lifespan, for the most part. We also notice that the traits are different among individuals, that we see, for example, the extroversion trait, that there are individuals who differ in extroversion. Somebody who is very high in sociability, someone who is very low in sociability. And so we should be able to see that huge difference among different individuals. They're also consistent in one's personality. They're consistent over time, and they're consistent in their measurement. We should see that this person is able to take the test and get the same score every time that they take the test, proving that the trait is consistent. And it should also be influential, that this trait has a meaningful impact on a person's behavior in their life. For example, the extroversion example, that a person will be sociable, that a person will be gregarious, that a person will be friendly with others, that it has a meaningful impact and a noticeable portion of this person's personality is driven by that trait. And so trait theories are concerned with these sort of isolated traits that show different things about a person's personality. And so the two most common trait theories are Eysenk's personality questionnaire, which deals with the facets of extroversion, neuroticism, and psychoticism, extroversion being a measure of sociability and positive affect in an individual, neuroticism being an aspect of sort of negative or negative emotional stability and negative affect, and psychoticism being a measure of the amount of aggressiveness and interpersonal hostility possessed by a person. Another very popular trait theory model is the Big Five, or the Big Five personality traits, otherwise known as OCEAN. And those five traits are openness to experience, sort of the amount of imagination, the amount of intellect that a person has, conscientiousness, how organized and how industrious they are, extroversion, again, how much sociability and positive affect they possess, agreeableness, how cooperative, trusting, and modest this person is, and neuroticism, again, the amount of emotional stability or negative affect of the individual. Eysenk's personality questionnaire is causal in nature. It attempts to explain these three facets in terms of neurobiological aspects. The reticular system and the limbic system in the brain are said to be correlated with these facets of personality. In contrast, the Big Five has no real causal explanation for the traits that it possesses. It claims a mix of genetics and environment for the role of these traits, but goes into no real detail on how the traits manifest or why they exist. So in contrast to the trait theory, we have the type theory. And the type theory is involved in a psychological classification of different individuals, that we are actually, quote unquote, putting people into boxes by typing them with a type theory, sorting them into different categories that are supposedly qualitatively different among each other. And so a type theory definitely emphasizes qualitative differences. For example, then I'll go over this, if you've ever seen the Enneagram of personality, a type 5 is supposed to be distinctly qualitatively different from a type 6, to have different core fears, to have different personality expressions, so that the types are mutually exclusive and that they possess, again, qualitative differences, in contrast to the more quantitative differences of a trait theory that can be measured and empirically correlated with different variables. As well as this, type theories promote discrete dichotomies versus the continuous spectrums of trait theory. For example, in Jung's original personality typology, he had the dichotomy of extroversion versus introversion. And in his type theory, that was a discrete dichotomy. You were either an extrovert or an introvert, in contrast to something like the Big Five, where you'd take a test and you'd be plotted on a continuous spectrum. Some people are going to be in the middle, some people are going to be on opposite ends, but by no means are you sorted into a classification of extrovert versus introvert. So where type theories put you into dichotomous categorizations, trait theories give you a continuous spectrum analysis of your personality. And some examples of a type theory include Socionics, obviously the theory that I'm going to be talking about on the channel, Myers-Briggs, the MBTI, obviously many of you may know that personality assessment, and the Enneagram, the theory of the Enneagram, and I'm sure many of you in the typology community also know that framework. So we've just highlighted the distinctions between a trait theory and a type theory. The trait theory being more quantitative, focused on these sort of isolated spectrums of personality that can be statistically correlated with one another, and in contrast to a type theory, where there are these psychological classifications of individuals that attempt to qualitatively explain their personality characteristics in a mutually exclusive manner. So with that out of the way, I'm going to move to part 2 of this lecture. What is Socionics? So, now that I've gotten everything written down, let's proceed to part 2 of this lecture and ask the question, what is Socionics? So I've defined Socionics, I've given like a short little operational definition of what I think Socionics is right here. And as described, it is a type theory, as we went over in part 1, of human personality based on discrete patterns of information metabolism called sociotypes. Now, information metabolism is a more complex concept that I'm going to tackle in a future introduction lecture, actually at the very end of the introduction series. But for now, how you can look at it is the exchange of information with the outside world, an individual's contact and interaction with the real world around them that determines, for the most part, their psychic qualities. So socionics as a science, as it was a science, a psychological theory, is at the intersection of a few different fields. It's at the intersection of psychology, the study of cognition and behavior, sociology, the study of social groups and society as a whole, and systems theory, which is embodied in socionics, the construction of socionics as a cybernetic model. So it has a lot of different components, it has a lot of different features to it. And the main thesis of the sociotype is that every person's mind is an unbalanced construct that seeks certain stimuli over others. That every person has a lopsided construction in their mind, that they want to seek certain information over others. They have different goals than others, they have different agendas than others, different things that they want to take care of and that they prefer in their lives, that determine, the sociotype defines, to a large degree, our worldview, our specific worldview and our perception of the world around us, our way of life, how we engage with the world and what we prefer to do and not prefer to do, our social niche, how we fit into society and use our strengths to benefit others, and the relationships that we possess with other psychologically compatible individuals. So the reason why I put these terms next to what I call the key terms is because they all correspond to a specific aspect of the model. Our worldview corresponds to what are called the information elements. Our way of life corresponds to the functions, our social niche corresponds to the sociotype, and our relationships correspond to the intertype relations. And those are all concepts that we're going to be exploring in future video series, so don't worry for now. But just to put them in the key terms category so that you know that these are all very important things that we're going to be looking at. I also put some sort of important terms that you should need to know but aren't related to any of these sort of core characteristics, and those are dichotomies. We can have dichotomies of elements, functions, and sociotypes, and as we went over in part 1, dichotomies are a very characteristic aspect of a type theory. These little mutually exclusive categories that we can place people or concepts into in order to sort them well. Also small groups, groups of the sociotypes, concepts like the quadra and the club, and other small groups that we'll be going over in the future. As well as that, integral socionics, or in parentheses, quadra progression, sort of viewing not just a person, but a group, an ethnos, or a nation as possessing a certain type of information metabolism. And that is a very advanced and sometimes sticky concept that we'll be going over in the far, far future, but I still thought I would put it in important terms. So, from the concept that every person's mind is lopsided, we can construct a lot of different concepts in the model that we're going to be going over in the future. But the main concept is that, again, to beat a dead horse, that every person's construct, every person's mind is unbalanced. And that is why we seek different relationships. We seek relationships with people who are complementary to us, who sort of complement our strengths and our weaknesses, who can help us on our journey, who can relate to us, who can connect with us. And those are all things that Socionics describes. So, I feel like I've described Socionics to a sufficient degree to continue doing these video lectures, and hopefully it satisfied you as well, and hopefully now you know what the field is about and what these video lectures are going to be about in the future. So, we've covered type theories, trait theories, and what Socionics is as a whole, and I will see you all in the next video lecture.